Andy Good with the Good Life YouTube channel here, and today we are checking out sawmills and learning basic land navigation at the 2025 Georgia Bushcraft Spring Campout.
The huge advantage to this over a circular mill is the blade curve. On a circular saw, you're losing at least a 1/4 inch every pass. This, you're losing about 3/16 at the most, an 1/8 to 3/16. So, which is where they get the the name of their brand, Wood-Mizer, because you don't lose as much wood when you're sawing. It's also, if you're looking at chainsaw mills or that kind of thing, it's also an advantage over a chainsaw mill, as the blade curve on a chainsaw obviously pulls a lot more wood out, so there's extra waste. This is a hydraulic model, fully portable. Same company, same brand. This is a manual version. They both cut exactly the same. There's some differences in the size of logs that you can put on. Obviously, how you put it on and move the log is different, but how it functions, this works exactly the same. They both have small gas engines on them. This is a 25 horse, I think that one's a 15. So there's a little bit of difference in power there, but a lot of similarities between these two. I think if you're a homesteader, something like that, you're looking to make your own lumber, the manual mill is the way to go. If you have the budget, this is nice, especially with larger logs. You've got a log turner, you can manipulate the log on the deck without having to muscle it. On this, you're going to have a tractor for a large log. You're going to have the tools to be able to turn it each time. So essentially what I did was I started the process here of making a square. When you take a log and turn it into a square or rectangle, that's then called a cant. And the cant is where you saw your boards from. So you saw the first two passes, now it sits flat on the deck. And this next cut that I make will be parallel to the first cut I made. And then I'm able to spin it last time, make the fourth cut. That cut will then be parallel to the second cut. And I should end up with a pretty square cant as far as that goes. And then it's ready to pull boards off of. This is a smaller log, but the process is the same no matter what size log you're dealing with. The only difference would be if you're sawing for live edge slabs or something like that. Obviously you're only milling two faces. You want that bark live edge on the other two. So that's maybe a little bit quicker in that regard. But so this machine does have what they call simple set, which is a type of set works. And so yeah, I can set it to whatever thickness I want for the board. Now I do a little bit of math, and I've got a little calculator here to help me. So this is my quarter scale right here. It's magnetic, so if I need to move it, I can. But in the lumber industry, sawmill industry, everything's cut in quarters. So 4 quarters is 1 inch, 5 quarter inch and a quarter, 6 quarter and 8 quarter is standard in the industry. So that's what this scale's showing me. So I just have to make sure when I make this next cut, typically if I'm sawing for say 1x boards and I want to get 1x6s, this next cut I'll try to set my width, my 6-inch width, and then I'll roll it the last time, and then I'm going to make sure I'm set wherever my head lands here. I want to make sure that it lines up with one of these 4 quarter lines, and then I can use this from there. I can use the simple set, and it will drop the head exactly, including the blade curve, exact amount every time. That's the big difference. That's another big difference between these two mills. This mill does have a scale on it, but it's got a hand crank here to raise and lower the head, which is pretty accurate. Each one of these little notches is an 1/8 of an inch or 1/16. I can't remember. But it's also got a scale right here with a similar type of setup. So you just raise and lower the head with the crank. And so you can do the same thing, you're just doing it all manually. This, you can kind of set it, you don't have to think about it. I can tell you this, as a business, I recouped my costs in the first year. And that was really just part-time. I mean, as far as the hours throughout the year that I milled with it. But I was able to recoup my costs the first year. If you're milling for yourself, there's going to be a longer return on it.
But you would also go to machine too.
You could, yeah. So this machine, this one's running somewhere around 35,000. This one's going to be under 10,000. And this, if you're milling for yourself, like I said, this will keep you hopping by yourself. This is going to go as fast as you're going to want to go, and it'll still bury you in lumber. You mill a couple days with this, and you'll have a couple huge stacks of lumber, and then you got to figure out what to do with it at that point. So I think if you're milling for yourself, obviously, you know, if you've got some big projects, I know some guys that have bought mills like this because they were going to build their own home. They were going to do a timber frame or a log cabin. They were going to harvest all their own logs or timbers. And so this made sense for them. They could pencil it out and it made sense. And then they sold it when they were done. These hold their value very well also, which is another benefit if you're doing it for yourself. But yeah, I would expect even with a big project like that, if you're doing all the work to prep all the material, say you're building a barn, to mill all the material, get everything ready to build, and then you build it yourself, I mean, that's probably a year-long process at minimum just to get through all that. So probably looking at a couple of years, I would think.
Blade costs
For this mill, these blades run about $30 a piece. You can buy them in larger quantities and get a price break on that. I buy
How many hours do they last
15 at a
roughly?
time. It depends on the species of wood you're milling. Obviously, the harder the wood, the less. I mean, there's some hickory logs where I'm a blade change every log.
Boy.
This hickory's so hard. Now that same blade that won't cut true on hickory anymore, I could run it in pine for probably another hour or two. White oak's pretty hard. It's a little bit less than hickory, so usually I can get a couple white oak logs. Depends on the length, diameter also. I mean, a lot of times I'll mill, if I'm milling pine or poplar or something soft, I can go 3 to 4 hours. Now I don't run mine till they're all the way dull, because I send them in to be resharpened. If you run them till they're all the way dull, there'll be some metal fatigue in there. You'll start seeing some cracks. The longevity of it's not going to be as long. So, and usually if I don't push them too far, too dull, I can usually get probably 4 sharpenings out of them at least. You can buy the sharpening equipment also. That's available from several different manufacturers out there. Wood-Mizer obviously has theirs, but Timber King, Woodland, a lot of those companies also sell sharpening equipment. So that's also an option. But yeah, I would say in general, you're better off not pushing your blade too far. Push it too long, too hard, you're going to end up probably regretting it. Now I know some commercial mills, they run them till they won't cut. They don't care about resharpening. They're just ordering huge quantities of blades and they just throw a new one on, and once a year they go to sell all the old ones for scrap metal. But that's I think a different equation than most of us are doing. And that's one of the most overlooked things I would say for most people that are looking into a sawmill is the sawmill's cool. And I love it a lot, but really when it comes to the sawmilling work, the bulk of the work's in material handling. Getting the log to the mill, moving lumber off the mill, dealing with the piles of sawdust, dealing with all the waste, the slabs. I mean, you're really in a material handling game at that point. And so making sure you have a spot where you can dispose of some of this stuff. It may just be a burn pile, but making sure you have a place where you can set up a burn pile, or you have somebody that would want it for crafts or for firewood or that sort of thing. So I think that's something you need to consider up front. I'll take a log every once in a while that I don't need for anything else and make 1-inch boards, and then I'll stand all the boards upright and make another pass at 1 inch. And so I'll have a bunch of 8 or 10 foot, 12 foot 1x1s and come back and cut them to length. I do stacks at 4 foot widths just because that's how long the forks are on my tractor. If you go too wide though, you don't want to probably go much over 6 foot, because if you go too wide, then you don't have as much airflow through.
Says what's your bearing, you would answer with the azimuth. The azimuth is the actual number. So the actual parts of a compass, real fast, all right, you guys all have base plate compasses, all right? So it's pretty self-explanatory, the base plate, okay? And then on your compass, you're going to have a movable bezel ring. It twists, it turns, and it should go 0 to 360. And if you are a flat earther, you're about to be proved wrong right now. Okay, and you're also going to have a needle inside that's always going to be pointing north, and that is called your magnetic needle. All right, that's the magnetic arrow. All right, that's always going to be facing north. And then on your movable bezel ring, you're going to see another arrow that's going to be just under north, and that is called your orienting arrow. Everyone see that? It's on the actual plate. Okay. We also have a nickname for that. It is sometimes called the doghouse, and it's sometimes called the shed. So when I say put the needle in the doghouse, or I say put the red point of your magnetic needle into the shed, you put red in the shed. But we're actually not supposed to say that anymore. So we call him Fred. We put Fred in the shed. Then we also have what's called our index line. Your index line on this compass is actually, it's kind of annoying because it's really, really, really faint on the compasses you have because it's actually black. Underneath your bezel ring, it's black, right? Well, if you look, there's actually a tiny little line that's right here, and it's black. It's black on yours, which is annoying. That's called your index line. All right, so that means if I say I want you to go 25, you would put 25 on that line. Now, every single compass is also going to have your direction of travel indicator. All right, so you see a big white arrow on your base plate compass. That is your direction of travel. That's the front of your compass. All right, so you never want that to point towards you. It's pointing what's in front of you, okay? All right, so the other thing, there's another feature of this compass is you can see that there's these black lines that are underneath the bezel. On this thing here, it's red, but they're black on yours. Those are called meridian lines, and they match the grid lines on your map. So when you are actually getting a direction of travel off of a map, those lines are going to become your best friend. Does everybody know that how metal is actually like a big no-no when it comes to compasses? So metal will actually interfere with this. So you always want to be really mindful of well, first of all, anyone who has a pacemaker or like metal in their body, this whole thing can go way off. So that's interesting. But stainless steel containers, even the tops of certain pencils, certain watches, even that ring that you have could interfere with the compass. So when you're actually getting a direction of travel with a map, you actually don't have to orient your map and you don't have to worry about metal as long as you are reading those lines. But we're not doing that in this class. And then depending on where you are in the planet, your compass will have a ruler that matches the scale that you're going to be using on your map. Now, in the U.S., most of our maps are 1 to 25,000. You can actually order a map that's 1 to 10,000. And what that means, if it was 1 to 10,000, a centimeter on a map is going to be equal to 100 meters, which means one grid square is going to be 1 square kilometer. But we often have maps that are smaller, it's 1 to 25,000. But those rulers are going to help you to calculate distance between 2 points. Again, we're not doing that. We're just learning how to use this map, or this compass. So, now that I know that this thing spins around, and I know that this needle kind of floats, all right, how do I actually use this thing? So, when you're using a compass, you can have the plug method and the shoot method. All right, so first of all, 0 is always going to be north. 90 is always going to be east. 180 is south. 270 is west. And we go back to 360. So 360 and 0 are interchangeable and they're both north. Now here's the problem. All right, this magnetic needle points to magnetic north, but it's actually not true north. It's actually not the top of our planet. So so our Earth, all right, its inner core, all right, it's technically facing the top of that, okay? Because our Earth is on an axis and it rotates. This magnetic needle is actually facing the top of our core. But true north is the top of our planet. Okay, so if this is only pointing magnetic north, then it's actually not matching our maps at all. So then you have this thing called declination. All right, so declination is the difference between magnetic north and true north. Now, if you're just talking about the continental U.S., there's this thing called the agonic line, and it's around the Mississippi, and that line is 0. It lines up directly with magnetic north. And so everything east of the agonic line, like where we are, we have a western declination because magnetic north is west of us, right? And then if we are on the other side of the country, we actually have an eastern declination because magnetic north is east. So then you have to do math. You need to know what your declination is and add or subtract that number to what your azimuth is. All right, so when you plug in a number, plugging in a number essentially is saying, I want to put in an azimuth and then I'm going to walk that direction. So what you'd have to do, let's just say 30. I would match up 30 to the index line. Okay, and that's where it gets tricky because that line is really hard to see. And then I'm actually like practically facing it right now. Then you want to move your body so Fred is in that shed. And then, so when Fred is in that shed, that means you are facing 30. Now remember, this thing always has to be flat, and it has to move. So you don't do this. All right, don't be like, oh, it's 30. That's not going to do anything. All right, it has to be like close to your body, and it has to be flat, and you have to move with it. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's practice this a little bit. All right, so let's put in 120. All right, so we match 120. You put that on our index line. And then we move our bodies. We get 120. And I know that 120.
Hopefully we're all facing the same direction.
Yeah. So you always want to make sure that Fred is in the shed.
Okay.
Now, also with these numbers, each tick on here is equal to 2 degrees, by the way. So if you have an odd number, like, I don't know, let's throw in 323. That means you have to put them in between 2 ticks. Alright, so I'm at 320. Yeah.
Impossible to see on this one.
It's tough.
323?
Yeah, 323. Alright, so that's, yeah. Da-da-da. There we go. Alright, so that is how you plug in an azimuth.
323.
Yep. So this way, I know that I'm now facing that azimuth. Yep, north-ish. Yeah, correct. Now, what if you want to shoot something? Meaning, I need to get the azimuth of something. An example of that would be, let's say I have a vantage point, and I can see, I don't know, there's a house in the distance. I need to get to that house. But I have to go down the hill, through the woods, over the creek, blah, 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 to get there. All right? The whole reason why we have compasses is so that we can walk in a straight line. Humans have the tendency to do what's called lateral drift. All right? So even when you think you're walking in a straight line, everyone's always going to have a heavy foot, and eventually you're going to walk in circles. Also, that whole, like, as long as I go into the woods and the sun is on my right shoulder, as long as it's on the left when I come back, I'll be all right. But what's going to happen if you're there for 8 hours? That math goes out the window. So have a compass is going to allow me to get from point A to point B efficiently. So let's say I'm at that hilltop and I can see a house in the distance, and I know that I have all these obstacles that I have to get to. But as long as I know, if I have that azimuth and stay on it, I know eventually I'm going to hit that house. So now, let's say we want to get the azimuth of that blue tent right there. All right, so I need to know what is that. So now I know that that's going to be my direction of travel. I want to get that azimuth. Now what I do is I move the bezel and I align the shed with Fred. And I get
north.
almost exactly north. It's because compasses are actually weighted depending on where you are in the planet. If you're in the southern hemisphere, which way does your needle point?
North.
It always points north, right? If you're in this, it's weighted in such a way to point north. So I want the northern part of my needle to always be in the doghouse, because if I did put the southern one in, it could be off. So if you ever had to go backwards, I would just spin the dial 180 and go back to where you came from. You know that your relationship to the North Star is the latitude?
Relationship to the North Star.
So if you were on the North Pole, right, where would Polaris be?
Directly overhead.
Directly overhead. All right? So if you were at the equator, it would be at the horizon. So your angle to where you are in the North Star is the latitude of where you are on the planet. So I can take this, I can point this at the North Star tonight, and I can actually look at that number that's reading, that level, and it'll be about 33 degrees, which is where our latitude in Georgia, Walkersville, Georgia is right now.
Okay.
But if you're
Calculate distance. You can calculate distance by how fast you walk. All right, so we have to do what's called leapfrog. All right, so if you're at a known point and you need to get to another one, you can do one of two things. You can stare at your compass the whole time, all right, but that's pretty annoying. But if you break up your distance, you can cover more ground quickly. All right, so with leapfrogging, this only works if you have a partner or you have a densely populated area with trees. All right, I can actually, if I had a partner and I would tell that person, if we're following an azimuth, I would tell that person to go as far as they could possibly go until I can't see them anymore, but they're still in my azimuth. So as long as I can still see just a part of them, all right, and they're in my sighting window, they're in my azimuth, and I tell them to stay there, now I can crush and get to that person. So this way you're just crushing ground faster. That's called leapfrogging. But if you're alone, you could do that with trees. You know, so I can look all the way to the distance and say, all right, I can see that pine tree is in my azimuth. As long as I keep my eye on that one tree, and I know it's that tree, all right, then I can I can go faster. And then another thing you can do is you can also create waypoints. But say goodbye to whatever your waypoint maker is, meaning like t-shirt material, flagging tape, what have you. All right, so if let's say I were to do what you were doing, I'm going to go 35 paces into the woods, I'm going to move. I now have to create a known point. I would flag that tree. The other thing is too is that let's say you're going camping overnight and you need to stay on an azimuth, or you need to go off the trail because, I don't know, you saw some morels, or you have to go pee, or what have you. Creating a flag and a waypoint on that azimuth is a way of just coming back to continue your direction or create a new direction. Say you have to do what's called boxing an obstacle or doglegging an obstacle. Let's say all of a sudden I've got a river I have to cross. Well, crap, how do I know I'm going to stay on that azimuth? You can do one of two things. You can do what's called boxing an obstacle, which means you shoot off and go 90 degrees off from where you are until you can cross that hazard safely, and then calculate that distance and then walk back. Does that make sense?
Then you walk
So
it
let's
again.
say I'm walking and I have a river, right? But I need to cross this river to continue my azimuth. Well, then what I would do is I would go 90 degrees and then I would find a point that I can then walk across safely. But I have to calculate that distance, because when I get across that, I would calculate the distance from the other side, and then I would know that I was back on the azimuth. Another thing that you could do is if you created a waypoint on this side and you crossed your obstacle, that waypoint will be in your reverse azimuth. Having the
Lost out
waypoint is
there.
going to be the easiest thing, because you can, as soon as you cross, let's say you cross the river, you could now you're just looking for it. You know, it's like, oh, there's the waypoint. It's in my reverse. I'm back on my azimuth. Here I go. Right. So that's the easiest thing to do. So I would always create a waypoint if I could. And if I didn't have extra material to give, I was sure as hell I would be cutting something in that
Yeah.
a tree
I've done that.
thing. They're actually saying that light blue, like aqua blue, closest to your pencil, actually, your pen, is supposed to be more visible than orange now.
Oh.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I did do a hike 2 years ago where I did bring a mapping compass because I knew that there was a part of that trail where the GPS didn't work. And so you had to hike 80 miles with just mapping compass. And there was a point where I got way off. So there was 2 different trail systems, and I wound up doing the winter trail system accidentally. And I was like, oh man, I have to get back online. And I actually had to do what's called resectioning. So I could see a mountain in the distance, and I know that was on my map, and I found another known point of origin on the map. And if I shoot those objects, where they cross on the map is where you are. So let's say I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail, all right, and I'm hiking in the off season, there's nobody there, and I want to camp off the trail. I can put a waypoint marker there so I know where the trail is. You know, there was a woman who got lost on the AT, and there's a large section of Virginia where there's no stops for 300 miles, and she was found. Like, she went off and she went to go pee, and she was only like 50 meters from the trail. She died.
She died in her sleep.
All right, so we can talk about pace speeds real fast. Okay, so once you know your pace count, it's handy to have ranger beads or pace beads. So they're essentially just a giant abacus. All right, there's 9 on the bottom, 4 on the top. This whole thing together could calculate about 5 kilometers. So every 100 meters that you walk, you would drop 1. Every 100 meters, you drop 1. All right, so now I've walked 200 meters. Now I've walked 3, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually, now if I get up to a kilometer, then I drop one of the big ones. And then I put these back up. It's just an abacus. Now I actually will have 2. Because I don't know about you, but sometimes I can't count 1 to 65 when I'm out there. All right, I was like, crap, was that 35 or 45, what have you? Now I got to reverse azimuth back, find what the fuck I'm going from. Sorry, excuse my French. So I can figure out. So what I'll do is I break it down.
Okay.
So for me, I'm 65 paces. So about every 7 paces, I know that that's 10 meters for me. Right? So I actually will have 2 different pace speeds. One that actually can get me to 100 meters faster. Because when you're out, the other thing too is that steps are paces. Because this is a step.
Right.
1, 2, 3, 4. A pace is actually every time 1 foot hits the ground. All right, so it would be 2, 3, 4, 5. It's actually 2 steps. So our pace is going to be, but we also need to figure out what our pace is going to be when we go uphill, because we short step, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do when we go downhill?
Long step.
Do you? I don't go downhill like, you know, right?
I don't
You
know.
still short step, right? So that's the thing. You have to kind of average all of them, the top. Like what I tell people is that it is 2025, folks. Everybody here has heard of the 5 C's, right?
Yeah.
All right. Cutting tool, combustion tool, coverage, cordage, and container. If you have something that is, then you've got everything you need. You'll be fine. I'm sorry, but the first C that you should always have, well, actually there's 2. One is a care kit. All right. Care, a first aid kit. All right. But the second one is communication. Communication. It is 2025. Your phone can do a lot. And the new phones today are all connected to satellites. It means as long as you've downloaded the map, you can't get lost. And the other thing is too, is like, once you start going down the land nav rabbit hole, it's actually, okay, here's the thing, like, I do not have a sense of direction, and I teach land navigation. But that's because I've also figured out how to build a relationship with this thing, you know? So, and then, you know, what you can do with this is beyond what people think. Oh, it's just to find direction. It's like, no, it's not. This could do way more. I can tell time, I can tell height, I could cross a river with this thing. You know, I could also, like, I can signal with it, I can make a fire with it, I can check my hair, I can check for ticks, you know? Like, this is a really cool tool, really cool. you.